Can the man who sits at your Sunday dinner table be doing unspeakable things to your daughter every single night? Tom searched for his daughter for 17 months. He printed thousands of flyers. He hired 3 different private detectives. He appeared on every local news station, his voice breaking as he begged anyone with information to come forward. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, he aged 10 years in the span of one, and every Sunday without fail his closest friends sat at his dinner table, offering comfort. "Don't give up, Tom, we'll find her," this man would say, placing a steady hand on Tom's shoulder. "I'm here for you, whatever you need." They prayed together, they cried together. This man, Mark, had been Tom's business partner for 15 years. Best friend since college, he was godfather to Tom's youngest son. He was, in every way that mattered, family. Every Sunday night after dinner, Mark would leave Tom's house, get in his car, and drive 40 minutes into the farmland outside of town. He would turn onto a dirt road that led to an abandoned property he had purchased years ago under a false name. He would walk to a modified shipping container hidden among the trees. He would unlock the heavy metal door, and Tom's missing daughter would be inside, waiting, terrified. She had been there for 17 months. Emily told me about the moment her father finally found her. We were 6 sessions into our work together before she could speak about it, and even then, each word came out fractured, like glass breaking in slow motion. When Dad broke down the door, I was sitting on the floor in the corner. I was wearing the nightgown that man had picked out for me, silk and lace, pink. He liked me in pink. She swallowed hard. Dad fell to his knees the second he saw me. He was crying, reaching out for me, saying my name over and over. But I couldn't move. I pressed myself into the corner because I thought it was him coming back. I thought it was a trick, some kind of test. It took me 30 seconds to recognize my own father's face. She went quiet. Her eyes locked onto something invisible, somewhere far beyond the walls of my office, somewhere I couldn't follow. In 17 months, I had forgotten what my father looked like. Some sessions, my patients heal as they speak, but some stories never leave my mind. They stay with me long after the session ends, following me home, keeping me awake at night. Today, I'm gonna share one of those stories with you. If you're listening to this and you have things you've never been able to let out, share what's on your heart in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment. I hear every story. If you want to stay updated on the therapy stories don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touched something in you, you can support me by liking. One day, I'd love to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send it to the email address in my profile. Remember, our stories heal, even just a little when they're shared. I've been a therapist for 22 years. I've heard stories that would break most people. But when Emily walked into my office, something in my chest tightened in a way it hadn't in years. Some patients you treat, others stay with you. They follow you home, they sit with you at dinner, they wake you at 3 a.m. I knew before she said a single word that Emily would be one of those. She walked into my office 5 years after her rescue. She was 23 years old, but when I looked into her eyes, I saw someone who had lived through a lifetime of darkness, compressed into 17 months. Someone who had aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. She didn't sit down right away. She stood near the door, her hand still resting on the handle, as if calculating escape routes, as if measuring the distance between herself and freedom. Her shoulders were hunched forward, her body folded into itself like origami. She was trying to occupy as little space in the world as possible. Her eyes darted to the window, to the corners of the room, to me. Quick, assessing glances that never quite settled anywhere. This posture told me everything before she spoke a single word. Victims of prolonged captivity often develop what we call hypervigilance, a constant, exhausting state of alertness that never fully switches off, even years after the danger has passed. The hand on the door wasn't rudeness or hesitation. It was survival instinct, hardwired into her nervous system after 17 months of learning that closed doors meant danger. That closed doors meant him returning. That closed doors meant whatever was about to happen next. That lesson doesn't unlearn itself easily. For many survivors, it never unlearns at all. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. You can leave the door open if you prefer, I offered gently, keeping my voice soft and unthreatening. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, more like surprise. Surprise that someone understood without being told. That someone could see the invisible architecture of fear that now structured her entire existence. She left the door open. Just a crack. Just enough. And then, slowly, carefully, as if the chair might swallow her whole, she lowered herself into the seat furthest from my desk, the one with its back against the wall, the one that gave her a clear sightline to both the door and the window. For the first 20 minutes of our session, Emily said almost nothing. She studied my bookshelf with intense concentration, as if memorizing the titles. She counted the ceiling tiles. I watched her lips move silently, numbers forming without sound. She picked at the skin around her fingernails methodically, rhythmically, until tiny dots of blood appeared on her cuticles. She didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she did notice, and the pain was preferable to whatever she was feeling inside. Then, without any transition, without any warning, she spoke. He used to count things too. The ceiling tiles in the container. He told me there were 47. He was proud of knowing that, like it was something important, something that proved how observant he was. She paused. But he was wrong. There were 49. I counted them thousands of times. 49 exactly. I never told him he was wrong. I let him believe he was right about everything. My breath caught, not at the words themselves, but at how she said them. Flat. Detached. Matter of fact. As if she were discussing the weather, or traffic, or what she'd had for breakfast. I've trained myself over 2 decades to maintain composure, to be the steady presence in the room. But in that moment, I felt something crack inside my professional armor. This young woman had learned to speak about horror the way the rest of us speak about ordinary things, because that was the only way to speak about it at all. And somehow, that adaptation, that survival mechanism, was more heartbreaking than tears would have been. Emily, I said carefully, I'm not going to ask you to tell me what happened. Not today. Not until you're ready. There's no timeline here, no pressure, no expectations. This is your space, your pace. But I'd like to understand where you are right now, in this moment. In this room. How does it feel to be sitting here? She considered the question for a long time. Her fingers stopped their picking. She looked at the blood on her fingertips with mild curiosity, as if noticing it for the first time, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Like I'm watching myself from somewhere up near the ceiling, she finally said. Like this isn't really happening to me. Like I'm an actress playing the role of Emily in a movie about Emily's life, but I forgot all my lines a long time ago, and now I'm just improvising. She paused. Nothing has felt real since I got out. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still there. If all of this, you, this office, my parents, freedom, is just something my brain invented to help me survive another day. What Emily was describing is called depersonalization, a dissociative response to overwhelming, inescapable trauma. When the mind can't process what's happening, when there's no way to fight and no way to flee, it creates distance. The self becomes a spectator to its own life. You watch yourself from outside your body. You feel like you're moving through a dream or a movie or someone else's story. It's evolution's last-ditch protection mechanism. If you can't escape physically, you escape psychologically. Your mind floats away from the horror and watches from a safe distance. But this protection comes at a terrible cost. You're insulated from the worst of the pain, yes, but you're also disconnected from joy, from connection, from love, from everything that makes life feel worth living. You're safe, but you're also numb. You exist, but you don't quite inhabit your own existence. When did things stop feeling real? I asked her. Can you pinpoint a moment? A specific time when the world started to feel like it was behind glass? Emily's jaw tightened. The muscles in her neck stood out like cords. She was quiet for nearly a minute, and I let the silence stretch without interruption. The third night, she finally said. Just 3 words. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. I understood that whatever happened on the third night had cleaved her existence into 2 irreconcilable halves, before and after. The person Emily was before that night An 18-year-old girl with dreams and plans and a future she took for granted no longer existed. She had been murdered as surely as if someone had stopped her heart. And this new Emily, this survivor, this ghost in human form, had been born in her place. Everyone assumes it was a stranger. Emily's voice cut through the silence of our second session like a blade. A masked psychopath who grabbed me off the street, that's the story people want to believe. Because if monsters look like monsters, you can protect yourself, you can see them coming. She met my eyes for the first time. But the man who locked me in that container, he'd held me as a baby. He'd been my father's best friend for 25 years. I called him Uncle Mark. He taught me to ride a bike. He came to my piano recitals. He bought me my first car because my parents couldn't afford one. Her hands began to shake. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to still them. At my 16th birthday party, he gave a speech about watching me grow into a beautiful young woman. My dad cried. Everyone clapped. And the whole time he was standing there eating my favorite chocolate cake, he already knew exactly what he was going to do to me. The container was already built. Mirrors, the nightgowns were already hanging. He was just waiting. Over the following sessions, Emily began to piece together the day that ended her old life. She spoke in fragments at first, like someone trying to reassemble a shattered mirror from scattered pieces, each shard reflecting something, but never quite fitting together into a whole image. I didn't push her to create a chronological narrative. I let her tell it the way her mind needed to tell it. In pieces, out of order, circling around the center without ever quite landing on it. She was 18 years old. It was a Tuesday in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, maples going red and gold, oaks stubbornly holding their green. The air had that particular quality of summer fading into fall, warm in the sunlight, cool in the shadows. She'd stayed late at school for a yearbook committee meeting. She was the photo editor that year, responsible for organizing all the candid shots into something coherent. The meeting ran long because they couldn't agree on a theme. By the time she left, it was after 5, and the light was starting to go golden. The walk home was about 2 miles, cutting through a stretch of wooded road she'd traveled hundreds of times before. She knew every tree, every curve, every pothole. It was as familiar as her own bedroom. Her shoes, new ones her mother had bought for the school year, burgundy leather with small heels, were giving her blisters. The skin on both heels was raw, burning with every step. I remember thinking about taking them off. Emily said, her voice distant, as if she were narrating someone else's memory, walking barefoot the rest of the way. But the road had gravel, and I didn't want to cut my feet. She laughed. That hollow, humorless sound again. I was worried about cutting my feet. That was my biggest concern in the whole world at that moment, blisters and gravel. I had no idea that my life was about to end. This fixation on small, mundane details is remarkably common among trauma survivors. The mind latches onto insignificant moments because they're safe to remember. It's easier to recall the pinch of new shoes, the texture of gravel, the quality of September light, than to confront the horror that came after. These details become life rafts in a sea of overwhelming memory, but they also become weighted with impossible significance. They transform into turning points that the survivor obsesses over endlessly. If only I'd kept walking. If only I had worn different shoes. If only I'd gotten a ride with someone else. If only I'd left school earlier, or later, or taken a different route. The guilt of random chance, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, transforms into a crushing burden of responsibility. The survivor becomes convinced that they somehow caused what happened to them by making the wrong, small choice. It's irrational, but it's also deeply human. We would rather believe we had some control over our fate, even if that means blaming ourselves, than accept that we were simply unlucky. A car slowed beside her. A familiar face behind the wheel. Her father's business partner. Her Uncle Mark. The man who had known her since before she could walk. "Need a ride, sweetheart?" he asked through the open window. The same smile he'd always had. Warm, easy, crinkly around the eyes. The same voice that had read her bedtime stories when she was small and her parents were out of town. The same man who had taught her to skip stones at the lake, who had carried her on his shoulders at the county fair, who had slipped her $20 whenever he saw her, for ice cream. Emily told me she hesitated for just a second, not because she sensed danger. Her conscious mind didn't register any threat at all, but because there was something in his eyes that day, something she'd noticed before, but had never quite been able to name. A quality to his gaze when he looked at her that had started to feel different sometime around her 16th birthday. His eyes always lingered too long, she said, her voice tight as a wire about to snap. On me. Specifically on me. At pool parties when I wore a swimsuit, when I came downstairs in a dress for church, when I hugged him hello and his hands stayed on my waist a little longer than they should have. I always felt it, this weight, this attention. But he was like family. More than family in some ways. He'd never done anything wrong. He'd never touched me inappropriately. He'd never said anything out of line. So I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was vain for thinking a grown man would look at me that way, that I should be ashamed of myself for even having the thought. She got in the car anyway. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and her old life ended. At first, everything seemed normal, Emily told me. He asked about school, about my friends, about college applications. I was planning to apply to Northwestern. I wanted to study journalism, become a war correspondent, travel the world and tell important stories. He said he was proud of me, said I was going to do great things, said he'd always known I was special. Her voice hardened. Special. That's what he called me. Before, I thought it was sweet. A compliment. Now I know what he meant by it. Then Mark missed the turn to her house. I pointed it out. I said, Uncle Mark, you passed my street. And he just smiled. That same warm smile. He said he needed to stop somewhere first, pick something up for a project he and my dad were working on. He said it would only take a few minutes and then he'd drop me right at my door. This is one of the most psychologically devastating aspects of these situations. The victim's own socialization becomes a weapon wielded against them. Women especially, but truly all of us, are taught from childhood to be polite, to not make others uncomfortable, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to second-guess our instincts when they conflict with social expectations. We're taught that being suspicious of people who haven't done anything wrong makes us paranoid, rude, ungrateful. Emily sensed that something was off. Her body knew before her mind did. That's why she hesitated before getting in the car. Some ancient part of her brain, the part that kept our ancestors alive on the savannah, was screaming a warning. But she overrode that warning because she didn't want to be rude. Because she didn't want to hurt the feelings of a family friend. Because she had been taught her whole life that her instincts were less important than other people's comfort. Her politeness, her consideration, her good manners, qualities she had been praised for her entire life, became the bars of her prison. They drove for what felt like an eternity. Out of the suburbs, past the last housing developments, into farmland. The houses grew farther and farther apart, then disappeared entirely. The road turned from pavement to gravel to dirt. That's when I started to feel really scared, Emily said. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My palms were sweating. Everything in my body was telling me something was very, very wrong. But I still didn't say anything. I still didn't demand that he turn around. I was still worried about being rude. She closed her eyes. I was about to be locked in a box for 17 months, and I was worried about seeming ungrateful for the ride. When the car finally stopped, Emily continued, her voice taking on that flat, protective quality again. I saw this structure. It was like a shipping container, the kind you see on freight trains or cargo ships. But it was bigger than normal. Modified. The metal had been painted dark green to blend in with the trees. There were no windows at all. Just a heavy steel door with multiple locks. She stopped. Swallowed. And I knew. In that instant, I knew exactly what was happening. My whole body went cold. I couldn't breathe. I reached for the door handle. I was gonna jump out and run. I didn't care where. I just had to get away. But it was locked. Child-locked from the driver's side. A safety feature for families. Keeping kids from accidentally opening doors on the highway. She looked at me with empty eyes. He'd thought of everything. Then she felt the cold metal of a gun pressed against her ribs. The strangest thing, Emily said, and this detail disturbed me more than almost anything else she shared, was that he didn't become a different person. That's what I expected. I expected him to change, to become a monster, someone I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing a mask that looked like Uncle Mark. She shook her head slowly. But he didn't change at all. He still talked the same way. Same voice, same expressions, same speech patterns, same Uncle Mark. He said, "Don't make this difficult, sweetheart. I don't want to hurt you. If you're quiet and do exactly what I say, everyone will be fine. You, your mom, your dad, your little brother. But if you scream, if you fight, if you try to run," he pressed the gun harder into my ribs. "Well, I'll have no choice. Do you understand?" She understood. He walked her to the container at gunpoint. His hand on her arm was gentle, almost tender, like he was escorting her to a dance rather than a prison. He unlocked 3 different padlocks, pulled open the heavy door, and pushed her inside. The interior had been soundproofed. Thick foam mattresses covered the walls and floor, not for comfort, Emily would come to understand, but to absorb sound. No one would ever hear her scream. There was a small bathroom area, a bucket behind a flimsy curtain, some basic cleaning supplies, a jug of water, a mini fridge stocked with food and bottled water, a microwave, and strung along the ceiling, casting a soft, multicolored glow over everything. Christmas lights, red and green and blue and gold, twinkling cheerfully in that windowless tomb, laid out on the mattress with obvious care, like gifts, nightgowns, silk, lace, satin, delicate feminine things in soft pinks and creams, things an 18-year-old would never buy for herself, things meant for someone else's fantasy. Makeup, perfume, hair products, jewelry, a full-length mirror. He'd been planning this for a long time, Emily said. Years, maybe, since I was a child. Everything was ready, everything was waiting, for me. That first night, Mark explained the rules. He did it calmly, almost cheerfully, like a landlord walking a new tenant through a lease agreement, like an HR manager conducting a new employee orientation. She was to wear what he provided. No exceptions. He had selected each item specifically for her, and it would hurt his feelings if she didn't appreciate his choices. She was to keep herself groomed and presentable at all times. Hair done, makeup applied, nails clean. He had left detailed instructions for exactly how he wanted her to look. She would follow them precisely. She was to never scream. The walls were soundproof. He had tested them himself. But screaming would be disrespectful, and disrespect would have consequences. She was to smile when he arrived. Every time. A genuine smile, not a fake one. He would be able to tell the difference. She was to thank him when he left. Thank him for the food he brought. Thank him for the movies he let her watch. Thank him for the small privileges he might grant if her behavior was acceptable. She was to call him by his first name, not Uncle Mark. That was for the little girl she used to be. She wasn't a little girl anymore. The enforced gratitude is one of the most insidious elements of coercive control. By forcing the victim to thank their abuser, the captor creates a perverse psychological dynamic where the victim becomes seemingly complicit in their own degradation. Every thank you reinforces the power imbalance. Every smile chips away at the victim's sense of self. It's not enough to dominate the body. Predators like Mark seek to colonize the mind, to make the victim an active participant in their own dehumanization. Over time, this forced performance can become automatic, a survival reflex that persists long after the captivity ends. Many survivors describe feeling inexplicable guilt, shame, even a disturbing sense of loyalty toward their abusers. Not because they truly feel these things, but because those responses were conditioned into them as surely as any laboratory animal learns to perform tricks for food. The last thing he told me that first night, Emily said, her words splintering, was that I would never leave that room. He said this was my home now, that these walls would be the last thing I ever saw, that I should get comfortable because I was going to spend years here. Decades, maybe, however long that turned out to be. She stopped. Her whole body was trembling. Then he said I was his now, that I belonged to him, completely, forever, that there would never be another man in my life, only him for the rest of my existence. And if I was good, Emily continued, forcing the words out, if I made him happy, if I did everything he wanted without complaint, My life would be comfortable as he could make it. He would bring me books, movies, nice food. He would take care of me, love me. She almost choked on the word. But if I fought him, if I resisted, if I didn't show proper appreciation for everything he was giving me. She couldn't finish. I didn't push her. Some silences hold more truth than words ever could. What happened in that container during those 17 months, Emily never described in explicit detail. And truthfully, she didn't need to. The specifics were written on her body in ways that spoke louder than language. The way she flinched when certain topics arose. The way she couldn't look at silk fabric without her hands beginning to shake. The way she couldn't wear pink anymore, had thrown out every pink item she owned the week after her rescue. The way she gagged at the smell of a particular cologne brand he had apparently worn. The way she couldn't eat strawberries because he had once brought them to her as a reward for good behavior. Her body remembered everything. Her body would always remember. The first few weeks I tried to fight, Emily told me in our 4th session. Her voice was steadier that day, not healed, but stronger. I refused to eat. I refused to wear what he picked out. I spit at him when he got close. I clawed at his face, his arms. I screamed until my throat was raw and my voice was completely gone, even though I knew no one could hear me. I told myself I would never give in. I would never break. I would die first. She rolled up her sleeve and showed me a constellation of faint scars on her forearm. Thin white lines, some straight, some jagged. That's when I learned what happened when I disobeyed. After those first weeks, she stopped fighting. Not because she accepted her fate. She told me that some part of her never stopped hoping, never stopped watching for an opportunity to escape. But because survival required a different strategy. Resistance wasn't working. Resistance was only making things worse. What Emily did next is called strategic compliance, a survival mechanism where the victim appears to cooperate while internally maintaining their sense of self. It's one of the most misunderstood aspects of prolonged captivity. People who have never been in such situations, which is most people, thankfully, often ask the questions that haunt every survivor. Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you try to escape? Why didn't you do something? These questions, however well-intentioned, reveal a profound misunderstanding of captivity psychology. In situations of extreme power imbalance, where the captor controls every aspect of the victim's existence, food, water, light, warmth, physical safety, overt resistance almost always makes things worse. The victim learns through brutal experience that fighting back brings escalated violence, while compliance brings small privileges, better food, less brutality, a book to read, perhaps eventually a moment of lowered guard that creates an opportunity. Strategic compliance isn't surrender. It's not giving up. It's playing a very long game in which the stakes are life and death. It's doing whatever it takes to survive until circumstances change. I started playing a role, Emily explained. The role of a girl who was broken, who had accepted her fate. I did everything he wanted. I wore what he picked out. I smiled when he came through the door. I thanked him when he left. I did my hair the way he liked it. I told him what he wanted to hear. Her jaw tightened. I made him believe he had won, that I was his, completely, and slowly, so slowly, he started to trust me. But the container wasn't the only prison. The psychological cage Mark built was even more effective. He told me things, Emily said. Every single visit, he would tell me things about the outside world, about my family, about the search for me. She stared at her hands. He said the police had given up looking after 3 months. He said they'd found a body in another state that matched my description, and everyone assumed it was me. He described my funeral in detail. The white casket, the flowers, the song they played, Amazing Grace, because it was my grandmother's favorite. He told me my mother collapsed at the graveside and had to be hospitalized. Her voice caught. He said my parents' marriage fell apart from the grief, that they blamed each other, that they'd separated. He said my little brother dropped out of school, started using drugs, got arrested. He said my father had started drinking himself to death. He painted this picture of everyone I loved completely destroyed by my
disappearance. He'd come straight from my parents' house. Emily's jaw tightened. Still smelling like my mother's cooking. still wearing the sweater my dad gave him for Christmas. And he'd sit down next to me in that container and describe every detail of their suffering. Her voice turned to iron. How thin my mom had gotten. How my dad couldn't look anyone in the eye anymore. How my little brother was failing school. He'd tell me about the prayers they said for me, the candles they lit. And then he'd say, she stopped. Something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. He'd say, they're falling apart without you, but don't worry, I'm taking care of them. I'm the only one holding your family together. And then he'd do what he came to do, while still smelling like my mother's pot roast. This is sophisticated psychological warfare. In isolation, without any independent source of information, the captor becomes the victim's sole link to reality. They can shape that reality however they want, constructing a narrative where escape seems pointless, where the outside world offers only pain and rejection, where the only option is to accept captivity and try to make the best of it. Mark was particularly skilled at this manipulation. He understood that physical chains weren't enough. Plenty of captives have escaped physical prisons. But a mental prison, one where the victim genuinely believes they have nowhere to go and no one who wants them, is far more secure. Even after rescue, these implanted beliefs persist. They burrow into the psyche like parasites. Emily knew intellectually that Mark had lied about everything. She had seen the evidence, 17 months of news coverage, thousands of flyers, a father who had spent every penny he had searching for her. But knowing something in your head and feeling it in your heart are very different things. Part of her, a part she was deeply ashamed of, still half believed that no one had really looked for her, that she had been forgotten, that she wasn't worth saving. That's the insidious genius of psychological manipulation. Even after you learn the truth, the lies leave scars. Around month 8, things changed, Emily said. He started bringing me more privileges. Books, a television with a DVD player, no cable, no news, just movies he selected. He'd come over and watch them with me, sitting next to me on the mattress like we were a couple on a cozy date night. Her face twisted with disgust. He'd put his arm around me, comment on the actors, offer me popcorn, tell me about his day, boring stuff, work problems, traffic, the weather, complain about his clients, complain about my father. I felt a chill. He complained about your father? To you? All the time. He'd say things like, your dad is so clueless. He has no idea what's happening right under his nose. He thought it was funny. He'd laugh about the search parties, how he'd organized them himself, how he'd sent everyone looking in the wrong places. He said it was the easiest thing he'd ever done, hiding me in plain sight while pretending to look for me. The worst part, Emily said quietly, was when he'd talk about the future. Our future. He had it all planned out. He said that eventually, after enough years had passed, he'd move us somewhere far away. A different country, maybe. Somewhere nobody knew us. He said we'd have a little house. I'd have more freedom. I could garden, maybe get a pet. He talked about it like it was a romantic dream, like I should be excited. She shuddered. He'd say things like, I know this is hard now, but it won't always be this way. You just have to be patient. Trust me, I'm doing this for us. He genuinely believed that eventually I would love him. That Stockholm Syndrome was a real thing that would magically make me forget everything he'd done and fall in love with my captor like in some twisted fairy tale. She met my eyes. He was insane, but not in a way that was obvious. He held down a job. He had friends. He fooled everyone who knew him for decades. He was insane in a way that was perfectly camouflaged by normalcy. I learned about the search from Tom himself. Emily's father came to one of our sessions at her request, though it took 3 months of therapy before she could sit in the same room with him. Not because she blamed him. She didn't. But because his face reminded her of everything she'd lost. Every time she looked at her father, she saw the life that had been stolen from both of them. She saw 17 months of his suffering. She saw the weight he'd carry for the rest of his life. Tom was a shadow of the man he must have been before. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, moving through the world like a ghost who hadn't yet realized he was dead. Even though his daughter was back, alive, physically present, sitting right there in my office, the guilt was eating him from the inside out. Tom suffered from what we call secondary traumatic stress, but his case was uniquely complicated by the element of betrayal. This wasn't just the trauma of having his daughter abducted. This wasn't even just the trauma of 17 months of not knowing if she was alive or dead. This was the trauma of discovering that his closest friend in the world, a man he had loved like a brother, a man he had trusted with his family, with his business, with his deepest fears and hopes, had been the monster all along. Every single memory of their friendship was now poisoned. Every backyard barbecue, every fishing trip, every late night talking about life over beers, every time Mark had held Tom's crying wife and promised they would find Emily, every prayer they'd said together. All of it was now revealed as performance. Camouflage, a predator maintaining access to his prey while savoring the suffering of his victim's family. Tom didn't just lose his daughter for 17 months. He lost his entire understanding of reality. His ability to trust his own judgment. His belief that he could recognize good people from bad. Everything he thought he knew about human nature had been proven catastrophically wrong. Mark was there every single day, Tom told me, barely holding himself together. From the first morning she didn't come home. He showed up at my door before I'd even called the police. He said he'd help, that we'd find her together, that I shouldn't worry. And I believed him. I leaned on him. He was my rock. Tom's hands clenched. He organized the search parties, sent everyone looking in every direction except the right one. He manned the tip line, probably deleted any tips that got too close. He stood next to me at press conferences. He held my wife when she couldn't stop crying. A sound escaped him, half sob, half laugh. He helped me design the flyers, chose the photo of Emily that we used. And every night after he left my house, he drove 40 minutes to where he was keeping her and... Tom couldn't finish. "How did you find her?" I asked gently. Tom stared at his hands for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. It was something small, so small. I almost missed it. He explained that after 17 months, he had become obsessive about patterns. He scrutinized every conversation, every person who had contact with Emily before she vanished. He created maps, timelines, psychological profiles. Most of it was useless. The desperate activity of a man who needed to feel like he was doing something. But he started noticing things about Mark. "It was the cologne," Tom said. "After 17 months, I'd memorized every detail of the last day I saw Emily. What she wore, what she said, the weather. And I remembered, she came home from school once, maybe a week before she vanished, and said Uncle Mark's cologne was too strong. She laughed about it, said he must have bathed in it." He swallowed hard. Mark never wore cologne. In 20 years, I'd never once smelled cologne on him. But that last week, suddenly he was wearing it. I didn't think about it then. Why would I? But 17 months later, I was going through Emily's old room for the 100th time, and I found a bottle of that same cologne in her desk drawer. She'd bought it for his birthday. Never got to give it to him. Tom's voice cracked. I called Mark's secretary, asked when his birthday was. She said March. Emily disappeared in September. So why was he wearing a birthday gift she never gave him? Unless he'd been in her room, in her things, before she vanished. He paused, his whole body rigid. That's when I started watching him, really watching, and I noticed he always left Sunday dinners at exactly 9:15, always turned left out of my driveway away from his house. So one night, I followed him. Tom followed Mark for 40 minutes that night, through town, past the suburbs, into the farmland, down increasingly isolated roads. I kept telling myself I was insane, Tom said, that I was about to destroy a 20-year friendship over paranoid delusions. Mark had been my best friend since college. He was godfather to my son. He'd saved my business during the recession. There was no way, absolutely no way, that he could be involved. But Tom kept following. Mark's car turned onto a dirt road that led to a property Tom didn't know existed. An old farmhouse, clearly abandoned, and behind it, partially hidden by trees, a large metal structure, a modified shipping container. Tom watched from a distance as Mark got out of his car, watched him unlock 3 different padlocks, watched him enter the container and close the door behind him. Mark stayed inside for 2 hours. Tom sat in his car the entire time, unable to move unable to think. When Mark finally emerged, Tom drove
home in a daze. I still didn't believe it, Tom whispered. Even then. My brain wouldn't make the connection. Couldn't make the connection. Who could possibly imagine that their best friend was capable of something like this? The next day, while Mark was at work, Tom went back. He brought a crowbar. He broke the padlocks. He opened the door. She was sitting on a mattress in the corner, Tom said, tears streaming down his face. Wearing this pink silk nightgown. Her hair was done up. She had makeup on. She looked like a doll, like something that wasn't quite human. His voice cracked. I called her name. I said, Emily, baby, it's Dad. It's me. You're safe now. And she screamed. This sound I'd never heard before, like an animal in a trap. She backed into the corner and started clawing at the walls, trying to get away from me. She didn't recognize me. My own daughter looked at me like I was a monster. Emily, sitting beside her father in my office, reached out slowly. Her hand moved toward his, not quite touching, just hovering near. It was the most physical contact she'd been able to offer anyone in years. It took 30 seconds, she said quietly. 30 seconds to recognize him. I'd been in there so long, with no pictures, no mirrors, nothing but Mark's descriptions of what was happening outside. I'd forgotten what my own father looked like. Tom broke down completely. I failed her, he sobbed. I trusted that monster. I invited him into our home. I let him near my daughter for her entire life. Everything she suffered is because of me. The aftermath was not a rescue. Not really. Not in the way people imagine rescue. The door opens, the captive is freed, and life goes back to normal. There is no normal after 17 months in a container. Emily couldn't sleep without all the lights on. Couldn't bear to be in any room with a closed door. Couldn't wear anything that wasn't loose-fitting cotton in neutral colors. Anything resembling the silk nightgowns made her physically ill. Couldn't eat most foods because they reminded her of him. Couldn't hear certain songs, smell certain smells, see certain colors without being transported back to that windowless prison. Recovery from prolonged captivity is not a linear process. It's not even a winding path with setbacks and advances. It's more like standing in a room where the walls keep shifting. Some days you make progress, other days you find yourself back in the darkest place with no memory of how you got there. Emily's healing was complicated by several factors. The length of her captivity, 17 months, is long enough for the psychological damage to become deeply embedded. The relationship with her captor, the betrayal by a trusted family figure, creates wounds that are fundamentally different from stranger abduction. And the particular psychological tactics Mark employed, the isolation, the false information, the enforced gratitude, the careful construction of a world where she was the prisoner of her own compliance. She wasn't just healing from what was done to her body. She was rebuilding her entire sense of self, her ability to trust, her capacity to connect with others, her belief that the world was a place where she could be safe. Mark was arrested at work in front of his colleagues. Emily told me she watched the news coverage obsessively in those first weeks, saw him being led out in handcuffs, his face blank, showing nothing. No remorse, no shame. Just that same neutral expression he'd always worn. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The evidence was overwhelming. The container, the supplies, years of planning documented in journals and browser histories. Everyone said I should feel relieved, Emily told me. Justice served. The monster locked away. But I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel anything. Because prison doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't give me back the person I was supposed to become. It doesn't give me back 17 months of my life. It doesn't make me able to trust people again. She looked at me with those ancient eyes in her young face. There's no sentence that addresses what he really took from me. I had no answer. Some wounds don't have remedies. They only have witnesses. Month 15, he fell asleep. Emily said it like a confession, like she'd been holding it underwater for years and finally let it surface. He'd never done that before. He always left afterward. Always. But that night, he just drifted off. And I lay there, 3 hours, not moving, barely breathing. The door was 20 feet away. Unlocked. I could hear him snoring. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair. 3 hours. I could have walked out. I could have run. But I didn't move. Not 1 inch. The tears came then, the first I'd seen in all our time together. I was too afraid, too broken, too convinced it was a test, and I've hated myself for it every single day since, because maybe I didn't want to be saved anymore. Maybe I'd already become what he wanted me to be. This was the core wound, not what was done to her body, not even the betrayal by a trusted figure. The deepest damage was what Emily believed about herself because of how she had responded to captivity. She had internalized a narrative of failure. She could have escaped, but she was too weak, too broken, too cowardly. This shame was heavier than any chain Mark had ever put on her, because chains can be removed. But the prison of self-hatred, the conviction that you are fundamentally defective, can last forever if it's not addressed. Emily, I said carefully, I want you to think about that moment again. But this time, I want you to imagine that it wasn't you. Imagine it was someone else, a woman you've never met, someone who had been held captive, brutalized, and manipulated for 15 months. A woman whose captor had promised to kill her family if she ever disobeyed. And a woman who had never, in all those months, seen him vulnerable before, who had no way of knowing if his sleep was real or if this was yet another trap. She was listening intently. That woman chose not to risk everything on an uncertain escape attempt. She chose to survive another day. She made a calculation based on 15 months of experience that told her any wrong move could be fatal. I leaned forward slightly. That's not cowardice, Emily. That's intelligence. That's your survival instinct doing exactly what it evolved to do, keeping you alive until you could find a way out. You're not here today because you were weak. You're here because you were strong enough to survive something most people can't even imagine. For the first time, I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not agreement, not yet, but doubt, a tiny crack in the wall of shame she'd built around herself. And doubt, in cases like these, is the first crack in the prison. He writes to me, every month, from prison. Emily said it matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather, but there was something new in her posture, something I hadn't seen before. Her spine was straight, her eyes were clear. The letters say he loves me, that I'm still his, that he counts the days until we'll be together again. She almost smiled. He genuinely believes that's going to happen. What do you do with them? I used to burn them without reading, couldn't even touch the envelope. She leaned forward. Now, I read every word, I save every page, I'm building a file. Why? The smile reached her eyes now, not warm, fierce. Because I'm writing a book, my story, the whole truth, and I'm going to publish his letters in it, every sick, delusional word. He wanted me to be his secret forever, his private possession that no one knew about. She stood up. First time she'd ever done that before a session ended. The whole world is going to know exactly what kind of monster hides behind a friendly smile. And there's nothing he can do to stop me. Emily's story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales end at happily ever after. Real life continues into the complicated, messy, beautiful struggle of actually living. She still lives with her parents. The outside world still feels overwhelming most days. She still can't work a regular job, not because she lacks ability, but because being in enclosed spaces with strangers triggers panic attacks that leave her unable to breathe. She still can't wear certain colors, can't eat certain foods, still sleeps with all the lights on and the door slightly ajar. But last month, she adopted a dog from a rescue shelter, a German Shepherd mix who had been badly abused before being saved. Skittish, scared of loud noises, terrified of men. We understand each other, Emily told me. Neither of us trusts the world. But maybe we can learn together. She walks that dog every morning now. Outside, in the open, in public places where anyone could approach her. Her heart still races. Her hands still shake sometimes. But she keeps walking. Her story, in her own words, at her own pace. She hasn't shown it to anyone yet. Maybe she never will. But getting the words out of her head and onto paper, she says, is like draining poison from a wound. It doesn't heal the wound, but it keeps the infection from spreading. And 3 weeks ago, she made a friend, a woman from an online support group for trauma survivors who happened to live nearby. They met for coffee at a public cafe. Emily sat with her back against the wall, her eyes on the door the entire time. But she stayed for 90 minutes. She talked, she listened, she laughed, genuinely laughed for the first time in years. When she told me about it, I asked how it felt. Strange, she said, like wearing clothes that don't quite fit anymore, like being a stranger in my own life. What do you mean? She thought about it for a long moment. I spent so long being scared, being empty, being nothing, surviving instead of living. And now I'm starting to be something, someone. I don't know who that person is yet. The old Emily died in that container, but someone new is being born. And for the first time in 5 years, I actually want to meet her. In 22 years of practice, I've learned to maintain professional distance. It's necessary. It's survival. You can't carry every patient's pain or you'll collapse under the weight. But Emily broke through. I still think about her story on quiet nights. I still see that 18-year-old girl walking home from school, worrying about blisters, not knowing her life was about to end. I still see her father's face when he described finding her, the guilt that will eat him alive until the day he dies. Some stories change you. This one changed me. Healing from trauma isn't about going back. You can't restore a person to who they were before the unthinkable happened, because that person no longer exists. The Emily who walked home from school on that September afternoon, carefree, trusting, innocent, full of dreams about journalism and travel, she's gone. She was murdered in a soundproof container. But another Emily is emerging from the wreckage, stronger in ways she never wanted to be strong, wiser in ways she never wanted to be wise. Scarred, yes, broken in some places that may never fully mend, but alive. And for the first time in years, wanting to be alive. That's what healing looks like for survivors of the unthinkable. Not restoration. Transformation. Not getting your old life back. Building a new one from the ruins of the old. Emily will carry those 17 months forever. The weight of them will never fully leave her. But she's learning that she can carry them. Not as a burden that crushes her into the ground, but as a testament to her own survival. She walked into that container as an 18-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. She walked out as someone else entirely. And now, 5 years later, she's finally beginning to discover who that someone is. I hope this story has helped you see your own life, your emotions, or the people around you from a different perspective. I hope it has helped you understand yourself and others a little better. I'd love to hear something about you in the comments, to know you a little better, to hear a piece of your story. If you want to share what's going through your mind, you can write to the email address in my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can click the bell icon to turn on notifications so you'll know when the next true story is ready. Before we end, I want to ask you a few questions. Take a moment to think about them. What do you think about this story? Does Emily's journey remind you of anything in your own life or in the lives of people you know? How well do we really know the people closest to us? Mark fooled everyone for decades. Tom, his wife, their entire community. Could someone in your life be hiding something you've never suspected? How do we balance healthy trust with appropriate caution? Emily blamed herself for years, for getting in the car, for not fighting harder, for not escaping when she had the chance. Do you think survivors of crimes should ever carry blame for what happened to them? How do we separate hindsight from responsibility? What would you say to the 18-year-old Emily walking home from school on that September afternoon, if you could go back in time? And what would you say to the 23-year-old Emily sitting in my office, still believing that her compliance made her complicit in her own captivity? Tom has to live with the knowledge that his best friend, a man he loved and trusted completely, was a monster who destroyed his daughter's life. How does a person recover from that kind of betrayal? Can he ever forgive himself for not seeing the truth? Emily chose to read her abuser's letters from prison, rather than burning them unread. She plans to publish them someday, to expose who Mark really was. Do you think confronting evil directly helps the healing process, or does it risk keeping the wound open forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Your perspective matters. Your voice matters.